The Striped Terror of Chamala Valley. Dear friends, this is the story of the Striped Terror of Chamala Valley, a man-eating tiger who had been terrorizing the villagers for months. The beast, known as the Striped Terror, had claimed the lives of over a dozen people, and fear gripped the valley. In 1937, a tiger is responsible for the death of 7 people in the space of 6 months. Into this atmosphere of fear and despair, a renowned hunter named Kenneth arrived. Anderson was known for his bravery and skill, and he had been summoned by the desperate villagers to rid them of the man-eating tiger. Anderson locates the tiger by tying out baits, and though not fully equipped, he decides to sit up over a kill and await the tiger's return. Successfully killing the tiger, the locals help to carry it back to the village, though Anderson begins to doubt if in fact this is the correct tiger. Days later, a report reaches him of a further tiger attack in the region. Anderson arrives on the scene and tracks the trail of the tiger up a dry stream bed. This time, he has found the right tiger. Let's listen this story described by Kenneth Anderson as thus. The Chamala Valley is part of the northeastern tip of the district of Chittoor in the Presidency of Madras, Chennai, where it adjoins the district of Cuddapah immediately to the north. It is a comparatively small valley, its main portion extending northwards for some 7 miles by 5 wide, with 2 branches at its extremity, like the letter Y, running respectively northwest and northeast, somewhat narrower than the main valley and each about 4 miles long. The branches terminate below the bluff crags of a towering escarpment that forms the southern boundary of Cuddapah. A beautiful stream, called the Kalyani River, flows down the northeastern valley, having its twin sources just below the escarpment, in magnificently wooded forest glens named Gundalpenta and Ambaumaru, where pools of translucent, ice-cold water are always to be found even in the hottest part of summer. The Kalyani then flows southward through the main valley and eventually enters a cultivated area at the hamlet of Nagapatla, with a Najat lake at which the kings of Chandragiri, and afterwards the all-conquering Mohammedan hero, Tipu Sultan, attempted to construct a dam to feed water to the parched countryside in the terribly hot months of summer. A heavily thatched, but snug forest bungalow has been constructed by the Forest Department on the southern side of the lake, bordering the ancient aqueduct. The sleepy village of Arapalli Rangampet lies about 1.5 miles distant, and is of almost recent origin. The Chamala Valley is entirely forested and in the days of British rule was a game preserve. Westward lies the Bakrapet forest block, and eastward the Tirupati forest range, which culminates in the great pilgrim shrines of Tirupati, famous throughout India. Southward is the ancient town of Chandragiri, with its age-old fort, a mute tribute to the glory of its former kings. A meter-gauge railway line passes close to Chandragiri, on its way to Tirupati and Renegunta, where it joins the arterial broad-gauge line from Madras to Bombay. A narrow cart road leads from Chandragiri railway station for about 3.5 miles to Rangampet, then it turns northwards for 1.5 miles to Nagapatla, whence it continues still further north and becomes a forest departmental path for all the 7 miles of the Chamala Valley till it reaches a spot named Pilibanu, which means tiger's cage, where it abruptly ends. 2 flat, square, cemented campsites, and a well to provide a continuous supply of drinking water have been constructed at this spot by the Forest Department. The valley and its branches are beautiful, and when I first visited them 18 years ago, were a paradise for game. Large herds of cheetal, or spotted deer, roamed the main valley, some of the stags carrying heads, the like of which I have nowhere seen in southern India. The slopes of the foothills running into the Bakrapet range on the west, and the Tirupati range on the east, as well as along the foot of the whole northern escarpment, were the home of magnificently proportioned and antlered sambar. The black or sloth bear could be found everywhere, but was especially numerous and dangerous in the dense forest below the escarpment. Kakar, or the mudjack or barking deer, as it is known, also abounded. The main valley and its northeastern appendage were the regular beat of tiger, which came from the Bakrapet range, passed up the valleys, crossed the escarpment and into the Cuddapah forests, thence to the Mamandar range and onwards to Setagunta. Panther were everywhere, and the area abounded in peafowl, spurfowl and grey jungle fowl, the latter especially being very numerous. This was the only forest in southern India where I have found jungle fowl crowing even at midday, and regularly at 2 a.m., and at about 4:30 a.m., apart, of course, from their usual chorus at sunrise and sunset. Into this peaceful area one day, early in 1937, came the striped terror of which I shall tell you. He was a tiger of normal size, and his tracks indicated no deformity that might have accounted for his partiality for human flesh. He suddenly appeared, no one knew from where, nor had any rumor been heard of the activities of a man-eating tiger in any of the adjoining forest areas, far or near. Strange as was his sudden and unheralded coming, it was soon well known that a man-eater had entered the valley, for he killed, and wholly ate, a bamboo cutter near the pools of Gundalpenta. Within 3 days thereafter, he practically entirely devoured a traveler on the Nagapatla-Pulibanu forest track, close to the 4th milestone. Thereafter, his killings became sporadic and irregular, extending throughout the length and breadth of the 3 valleys, where in all he killed and devoured, or partly devoured, 7 people in the space of about 6 months. One day the forest range officer from Bakrapet, in whose area the Chamala Valley is included, was on his way to take up residence in the forest bungalow at Nagapatla, during his rounds of inspection. He traveled by bullock cart, in which he was also bringing provisions, personal effects and other necessities for the period of a fortnight he would stay at Nagapatla. It was 5 p.m., and the cart was hardly 2 miles from its destination, when a tiger walked onto the road in front of the vehicle. I should have told you that this road, leading from Bakrapet to Nagapatla, ran through the reserved forest for practically its whole length, the last 2 miles being across the beginning of the Chamala Valley itself. Seeing the tiger on the road before him, the cart driver brought his vehicle to a stop and called out to the range officer and the forest guard who were with him. As the cart was a covered one and they were inside, neither had seen that there was a tiger on the road. The 3 men commenced to shout, when the tiger, walking along the clearing that bordered the road, passed the cart and so came into view of the 2 men inside. At this juncture the forest guard, for no understandable reason, jumped out of the cart and commenced waving his hands and shouting, to frighten the beast away. However, he sealed his own fate, for with a succession of short roars the animal charged, seized him in its jaws, and bounded back into the concealing forest. The action had been so unexpected and abrupt that the range officer had no opportunity to do a thing, although what he could have done in any event was problematical, as he himself was unarmed. The cart was then driven to Nagapatla in great haste, but it was not until the following morning that a large group could be assembled, armed with matchlocks, hatchets and staves, to attempt to find the unfortunate forest guard, or rather what was left of him. The remains were eventually located in a ravine, less than a furlong from the road. Only the head, hands and feet, and his blood-stained and mangled khaki uniform and green turban, were left to tell the tale, the latter lying where it had fallen when the tiger jumped with its victim across the clearing that bordered the road. This tragedy received a great deal of official attention, and was published by the press throughout the country. A reward was offered by the government to eliminate the man-eater, and several venturesome hunters, both local and from the city of Madras, arrived at the valley to destroy the creature. But after its last killing, and as if it had become aware that it had attracted too much attention, the terror completely disappeared for a while, nor could any trace of it be found anywhere in the valley. The assumption was that it had escaped either by traversing the escarpment northwards into the Cuddapah district, or had wandered into the Bakrapet or Tirupati blocks. The whole locality was on the alert, but nothing was heard of the animal for the next 2 months. Then one day a railway ganger, patrolling the broad-gauge railway track near the station of Mamandar, which stands on the Madras-Bombay arterial line, and is situated in a wide, densely forested plateau, encircled with hills, some 18 miles northeast of the Chamala Valley, failed to report at the terminal point of his patrol. No particular notice of his absence was taken for a day or 2, as sudden absenteeism on trivial grounds is a common occurrence in the East, but when after that the man still failed to put in an appearance, the matter was regarded more seriously, and a squad was sent out to try to find him. Walking along the railway, the first clue to the missing man's fate was the large hammer he had been using, which was found lying beside the track. Gangers are issued with such hammers to keep in place the wooden blocks used to wedge the rails against their supports, known as chairs. On the hard, sun-baked earth, no signs of any struggle was evident, but not far away were a few drops of blood that led down an embankment and into the neighboring forest. Following this trail, the party came across an odd chapley, or country-made slipper, as worn by the missing ganger, together with traces of blood that had been smeared against the leaves of bushes. A little further on they crossed a strip of dry, soft sand, traversing which they clearly found the pug marks of a tiger. This established that the missing man had been taken by a tiger. The fame of the man-eater of the Chamala Valley had spread far and wide during the past months, and naturally it was concluded that this animal was responsible for the latest tragedy. Incidentally, the remains of the ganger were never found. Thereafter, 2 kills occurred during the succeeding months, the first at Setagunta, n miles northwest of Mamander, and the second at Umbalmaru, which, as you will remember, was one of the twin sources of the Kalyani River before it entered the Chamala Valley. At this time, I was on a business visit to Madras and had had occasion to visit the Chief Conservator of Forests with regard to a complaint I had earlier lodged against the activities of local poachers in the Salem district. While talking to the Chief Conservator, he mentioned the activities of the tiger, of which I had read a great deal in the press, and suggested I make an attempt to bag the animal. Fortunately, I had not availed myself of privilege leave during the past year, and as I had some months to my credit, I decided to spend one of them in making such an effort. Returning to Bangalore, I spent the next few days in getting together all the many necessities for such an undertaking, and 10 days later I was at the Nagapatla Forest Bungalow, which I had decided to make my headquarters in conducting the campaign against the man-eater of Chamala. The first thing to do was to make exhaustive local inquiries, visit the spots in the Chamala Valley where the kills had occurred, and try to establish some sequence in the localities where the various incidents had taken place, so as to arrive, if possible, at a knowledge of the beat the tiger followed. This I entirely failed to do. It became obvious that this particular animal was a wanderer, who visited the valley there for some time, snatched a human victim wherever opportunity offered, and climbed over the escarpment in the direction of Mamander or into the Kadapa district. Not without considerable difficulty, I purchased 4 young buffaloes. These I tied up at widely separated points, one at Gundalpenta, another at Umbalmaru, a third at a waterhole called Narasimha Cheruvu, close to the 4th milestone of the Nagapatla-Pulibanu Forest Road, and the last at a rocky stream named Rajamankanar, a tributary of the Kalyani River, as it issued from the rocky hills of the Tirupati block about 2 miles east of the road. On the second day the bait at Narasimha Cheruvu was killed, but examination showed this to be the work of a large tendu, or forest panther, and not of a tiger, as I had hoped. As baits are costly and I could not afford to lose them to interfering panthers, I sat up for this animal by the waterhole, and was lucky enough to bag him by 6:45 p.m., while it was still daylight, when he returned to the kill. I then bought another bait, to replace the one the panther had killed, and secured it to the same spot at Narasimha Cheruvu. The next week was spent in idleness at the forest bungalow, except for long walks throughout the forest every morning and evening in all directions in the hope of accidentally meeting the tiger. On the morning of the 9th day, when driving early in my Studebaker in the direction of Pulibanu, from where I intended starting out on another stroll through the jungles, I came across the pug marks of a tiger which had joined the road at the 6th milestone and had walked down the middle of it to beyond Pulibanu. No distinguishing peculiarities about the man-eater's tracks had been so far observed, so that it was impossible to tell whether the animal that had made these fresh tracks was the slayer I was seeking, or just a casual wandering tiger. These pugs were, in places, very clear in the soft roadside sand, and I was able to examine them minutely, but beyond enabling me to say that they had been made by a male tiger of average size, no other peculiarity or distinguishing mark of any sort presented itself. Leaving the car at Pulibanu, I walked up the northeastern valley, the forest track crossing and recrossing the Kalyani River, where I saw that the tiger had preceded me for some distance. I visited both Gundalpenta and Umbalmaru that day, in high hope that one or other of my baits had been taken, but found both of them alive, placidly chewing at the large piles of hay I had left them so that they might be as comfortable and as contented as possible. After lunch that afternoon I returned and attempted to follow the tiger's tracks from the place I had last observed them. But I only partly succeeded, losing the tracks in some heavy bamboo that clothed both banks of the river along its higher reaches. It was fairly late that evening when I turned back towards Pulibanu. Proceeding a half-mile, and still within the heavy bamboo belt, I came upon a sloth bear which had made an unusually early appearance, as these creatures do not begin their wanderings till after sundown. He was standing up against a large white ant hill, with his nose and a part of his head inside the hole he had made, drawing the white ants into his ready mouth with powerful inhalations. He looked for all the world like a very black, hairy man, standing against the ant hill, while the noises he was making in his efforts were extraordinary, resembling the buzzing of a million bees, interspersed with loud, impatient snufflings and shufflings, as of a giant bloodhound on the trail. I drew quite close to the bear, yet he did not see me, so engrossed he was in his congenial task. I could have come still closer, but this would have meant that, when eventually he did become aware of my presence, he would probably attack, and I would have to shoot him. This I did not want to do, as personally I have no quarrel with bears, and secondly, the sound of my shot would disturb the jungle and might result in driving the tiger away. So I stopped at the distance of about 40 yards and coughed loudly. The bear heard me, ceased his buzzing and snuffling, and whirled around on his hind feet, to face me with an expression that was amusing, to say the least of it. Annoyance, fear, chagrin and resentment were writ large across his mud-covered features. For a moment he watched me, rising still higher on his hind legs, and I thought at first he would make a blind charge, which is the habit of the sloth bear when disturbed at close quarters. But better judgment prevailed, he sank to all fours and bolted for all he was worth, bounding away like a black hairy ball, muttering, "Awful, awful, awful." 9 early next morning found me back at Pulibanu. There were no pug marks on the road to indicate the tiger's return, leaving the inference that he was somewhere in the northeastern valley, or that he had departed across the escarpment. Leaving the car, I trudged to Gundlepenta, but found my bait alive, still chewing hay as if nothing else in the world mattered. Then I went on to Mbalmaru, and upon approaching the spot where my other bait had been tethered, found that it was missing. Examination revealed that it had been killed by a tiger, which had then succeeded in dragging it away, after first snapping the strong tethering rope with which I had secured it. To follow the drag mark was easy, and after proceeding about 100 yards, my attention was attracted by a solitary crow, perched on the low branch of a tree, looking downwards in expectation. This could only mean one thing, that the tiger was there and in possession of his kill. If he were not there, the crow would have descended to feed on the carcass, instead of sitting on a branch looking so dejectedly downwards, as he was doing at that moment. The tree on which the crow was sitting overlooked a downwardly sloping bank of speargrass, at the foot of which was a small depression densely covered by a thicket. It was somewhere in this thicket that the tiger and his kill were sheltering. To approach this thicket directly was inadvisable. To begin with, the tiger would probably hear me and decamp. On the other hand, and especially if he were the man-eater, he would undoubtedly charge, and the proximity of the surrounding bushes and the length of the spear grass gave me a very poor chance of being able to stop him before he reached me. I therefore backed away some 50 yards and began casting about for a detour by which I could approach the spot from some other angle, or perhaps from the opposite side, where I could glimpse the tiger from more favorable ground. To my good fortune, a shallow nala ran diagonally across, roughly from northwest to northeast, on its way to join the early reaches of the Kalyani River. Tiptoeing up this nala, I soon judged I was abreast of the thicket in which the tiger lay. Continuing for another 25 yards, I cautiously climbed the right-hand bank and found, as I expected, that I was now some little distance beyond the thicket. A half-grown tamarind tree lay a few yards ahead of me, and creeping up to this, I swung myself into its sheltering branches, and then climbed higher in the hope of being able to look down into the thicket, but I was disappointed in that I could see nothing. Not even the crow was visible from this position, as the low branch on which he was perched was obscured from my view by the intervening thicket. I had therefore no means of knowing whether the tiger was still there, or had moved on. I remained in this position for about half an hour, hoping that the jungle or rather its inmates would indicate the movements of the tiger if he came out of the bushes. The sun was well up by now, and I knew the tiger would soon move off to one of the water pools of Umbalmaru, to quench his thirst after the heavy meal he had undoubtedly had. Then I heard the peculiar alarm cry of a grey langur monkey. Harl harl harl, he called, from 100 yards to my left. This he repeated steadily, to the accompanying cheek of a female of the tribe. The tiger had moved at last, and the langur watchman had seen him. There is no need for me to tell those of my readers who are familiar with the Indian forests about the wise ways of langur monkeys. Those who are not will be interested to know that these great grey arboreans, with black faces and enormously long tails, live in tribes in the forests, where they exist entirely on wild fruits, certain leaves, and of course the multifarious caterpillars and insects which form a particular delicacy. The flesh of the langur is an outstanding attraction on the menu of tigers and panthers, and of some jungle tribes, so that generations of hard experience have taught them to post a watchman, who invariably takes up his position on the highest tree and keeps an intent lookout for prowling felines. It might do some humans good to take a leaf out of the langur watchman's book, for while he is on duty this langur will not feed or allow his attention to be in any way distracted from his job. He realizes that the safety and lives of the babies, females, and other members of his tribe depend entirely on his vigilance. You will see him on top of the highest tree, sitting alert and looking around. Not a movement within visible range escapes his beady, black eyes. Eventually, and only after he is relieved by another watchman, will he think of feeding himself. The normal calls of langurs at play are a series of resounding hump-humps that echo down the hillsides and the deep forest glens. When he spots danger, however, the watchman barks, harl har I harl in a successive series of calls, and the tribe seeks safety in the highest trees. Alas, for all the wisdom of the astute langurs, tiger and panther have also developed an instinctive technique to overcome the cleverness of these monkeys, for they too must eat. When they hear the watchman's call, tigers and panthers who have been stalking the tribe know they have been discovered, and that the monkeys will take to the highest trees. So they now change their tactics, and after having located a tree on which a number of the apes are seated, rush with a series of blood-curdling roars towards it and possibly leap to the lowest fork, as if to climb the tree themselves. Seated on the highest branches, the langurs would be quite safe if they would only stay put. But the horrid snarls and roars, together with the terrible striped or spotted form charging towards them with wide-open jaws, unnerves the poor beasts, and they jump wildly from their perches of safety, either in attempts to reach neighboring trees, or from the great height onto the ground itself, where one of them invariably falls an easy prey to the tiger or panther anticipating the fully sh act. But I have digressed, and must return to what happened after I heard the langur watchman's ha, har, har. Clambering down the tree, I crept forward with my rifle at the ready diagonally towards the spot from which the langur watchman was giving his warning. Knowing the tiger to have fed well, I did not anticipate it would attempt to molest the monkeys on this occasion, but that when seen by the watchman he was making his way towards one of the pools. Spear grass and wait-a-bit thorn grew prolifically in this area, and progress was both slow and difficult. Proceeding very cautiously about half a furlong, I caught sight of the langur watchman on the topmost branch of a wild cotton tree, at the same instant as he saw me. He now had two possible enemies to observe, and I knew if I watched carefully enough I would be able to get a rough idea of the tiger's whereabouts by noting in which direction the langur was looking. I accordingly squatted down on my haunches in the long grass and froze. The watchman looked in my direction for a few seconds, then looked away to his left, then back again at me, then back again left, still voicing his alarm. I knew by these glances that he was watching both me and the tiger and judged the latter to be ahead of me by at least 100 yards. Getting to my feet, and bent double, I shuffled forward as rapidly as possible in the direction I judged the tiger to be, much to the consternation of the already excited langur watchman, who could not make out whether I contemplated an attack against the tribe or against the tiger. His alarm call redoubled both in tempo and volume, a fact which began to worry me as I knew the tiger was listening to him too, and would sense, by this increased excitement, some fresh source of danger to the monkeys and so also, perhaps, to himself.